Resilience, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. Toughness. What does this mean in terms of the economy? What does this mean in terms of economic development? Basically, it means that we want to get back to our original jobs, income, and tax base growth that we had prior to the pandemic. My name is John Maynard, and I'm an economic developer here in Oxford, Mississippi, and I'm very proud of the work that we do here in Oxford. In my 15 years as a professional economic developer, I've come to some pretty strong conclusions about what it takes to have a resilient economy. What I've discovered is that in order to have a resilient economy, particularly in Mississippi, my profession, economic development, has to change how and why we do what we do. So what is economic development? What exactly do economic developers do? Is it industrial recruitment or job retention or community wealth building? Well, yes, it's all of those. But really, what's the purpose of economic development? It's not a trick question. It's not rocket science. The purpose of economic development is to develop the stupid economy. Come on. It's that simple. But what I find is economic developers get so bogged down in the activity of what they do that they forget to develop the economy. They forget the purpose of their job. When you think about economic development, you probably associate it with industrial recruitment. Well, so do we. We call that whale hunting. Whale hunting is the idea that we go out and we recruit a large manufacturing plant and bring it back to our community, and the economy is going to grow because they're there. Whale hunting is a very difficult thing to do. Whale hunting is expensive. We win these whale hunts by competing with other communities, by offering tax incentives and other negotiable items so that the company's bottom line is affected and they choose your community over somebody else. How do we measure the success of whale hunting? Currently, we make announcements. Announcements about two things, really. We announce the deal that we've just made, but more importantly, we make announcements about the metrics of jobs and investment. We look at the number of jobs and the amount of investment that the company is going to be bringing to our community. Do these announcements say anything about the long-term effects on the economy? No, they don't. But economic developers are spending all their time trying to work this out, assuming that our economy is going to grow. We read the headlines and we assume, well, this is all good news. Things are going to be happening here. But is it really? You know, talking about jobs and investment in economic development is a lot like me talking about my checking account. If all I told you about was the deposits, it sure would look pretty good, wouldn't it? But in reality, jobs and investment is not the best way to measure economic development success. So let's look and see if whale hunting has actually changed the economy in Mississippi. Has it developed the economy? And let's make it as simple as possible. Let's talk about three items: total population, total employment, and very specifically, manufacturing employment. We want to see a positive change to all those if we're going to be successful in developing the economy. So in order to do this, we also have to go back in time. We have to go back in time to see how things changed over time. And I'm going to show you something here. It's easy to read. It's a map of Mississippi with all the counties outlined. Green is good, red is bad. Green means we had growth in that county. Red means we had decline. So let's go back to the 1990s. What was going on in the decade before the turn of the century? Actually, it was pretty good. Total population, we grew by about 10.5%. Our total employment, we actually grew by over 22%. Manufacturing employment, well, that wasn't so great. We lost about 6%. But, you know, our strategy involves directly recruiting manufacturers. We got this, not a problem. So we fast forward to 2000, the turn of the century. Let's look at the 19-year time frame from 2000 to 2019. What happened then? I'm willing to say we don't got this. We actually cut our population growth in half. We actually had a net job loss of over 7,000 jobs. We lost 84,000 manufacturing jobs. What's worse is we're losing population and we're losing jobs, but we're also getting poorer and poorer. In terms of per capita income, the good news is that the rate of growth of per capita income for the state of Mississippi over a 30-year time frame was the exact same rate of growth that we had as the national average in the U.S. The downside of this, though, is that Mississippi, in terms of personal per capita income, we only make 75% or less than the national average. What's even worse than that is the fact that we've been this way for over 30 years with absolutely no sign of changing that trend. Now, I talked about being very proud of my work here in Oxford, Mississippi. Oxford, Mississippi is doing some great things in economic development, and I'm very proud of that. So we add Oxford to the list here, Oxford to the chart, and we see that Oxford, while we're still low in per capita income against the United States, we're making great strides to close that gap. For Mississippi, in terms of median household income, unfortunately, we're actually going the wrong direction. Over the past 30 years, we have widened the gap against the national average for median household income. Again, I'm proud to say that Oxford, while we're still low against the national average, we're working to close that gap. Here's something that's a very frightening report that came out recently from the Southern Regional Education Board. The Southern Regional Education Board said that due to the effects of the pandemic and the effects of automation, 589,000 workers, 51% of our complete workforce in Mississippi, is at risk of being unemployed or reduction in hours. Most of this is because of automation. Keep in mind, your cell phone is one of the leading culprits in the automation revolution. And the sad thing is, the most vulnerable workers are those with the lowest skill and the lowest education. Now, what's also interesting about this report was it was projected that this would happen by 2030. And then we had a pandemic. And the pandemic reduced that time. And the time it takes to get an undergraduate degree, well, most people, 4 years, we will have the risk of 51% of our workforce out of work. How is economic development going to handle this? What are we going to do about this? So exactly what is the problem? So I'm an economic developer, and I look at it through an economic development lens. And I see the problem is in economic development, particularly in the South, we're still doing economic development the way we did it in the 1920s. We're still working to convert farms to factories. We're still making announcements and looking at jobs and investment as our metrics without analyzing what's happening with the rest of the economy in this. But the real problem is that we're doing everything we can to solve new problems with very old ideas. So how do we solve this issue? Well, the first thing we have to do is create a mindset shift. We have to start looking at people-based economic development instead of company-based economic development. That's a very hard thing for an economic developer to do. That's a very hard thing to look at and say, I've got to change everything that I do to go a different route. So with people-based economic development, we're looking at the new trends in who we are. We've seen great changes in technology. We've seen great changes in cultural values. Today, we can work anywhere, for anyone, from anywhere, and we can do it faster and more efficiently than we could before. That way, it gives us time to focus on things that are important, like selfies and taking pictures of our food. Yeah, that is me. But selfies and pictures of our food tell us a lot more about who we are than you actually think. While we live in the digital world and we communicate instantly, what we're communicating is the human experience. The human experience has become the top priority in our world. Economic development must capture that human experience. If whale hunting is the reference we use for traditional economic development, what do we use as an analogy for this people-based economic development, this alternative way of doing things in economic development? Well, I would say it's tropical fish. Particularly, it's creating the right reef structure to support and attract the type of tropical fish that you want in your community. Now, I know that's a really cute analogy, but how does it work and what does it look like? Well, I've boiled it down to 5 basic elements. And those 5 basic elements all have a how in them. But the community that is doing these economic development fundamentals must decide on how to do each one of these things. So, take it number 1. Number 1, we must be data-driven. If there was any one thing that I would recommend to change economic development, that would be metrics. Objective metrics, observed over time. This would give us our best ability to innovate successfully. We use currently 2 metrics for economic development. That's jobs and investment. But there's a lot more going on in our community, a lot more going on in our economy, and we must be cognizant of this. In Oxford, we look at 7 metrics. 7 metrics. Those metrics are population, total employment, average annual income, per capita income, civilian labor force, assessed value, and retail sales. Those 7 metrics tell us a lot more about the human condition than those 2 metrics ever will. Now, we look at these metrics over a most recent 10-year, most recent 5-year, and most recent year-over-year pattern, so we can start looking at trends. And we look at those trends, and so we can spot the ways that we can create the strategic programming in our organization to actually change before concerns become issues. Number 2, we must be people-focused. People-focused economic development, we must be people-focused. Traditional economic development focuses on recruiting companies. The priority is the livability of a company in your community. The idea being, how can our community best affect the bottom line of that company? And again, changing the mindset from company-based to people-based economic development is a very hard thing for an economic developer to do. But economic development, in order to be people-based, we must make our communities more attractive and more livable. We must do everything that we can to be inclusive in economic development so that everybody gets the benefit of our actions. And then we must use our metrics to understand what's affecting the people in our community. Number 3, we must support our local economy. People create jobs. People are the economy. We all know somebody who is a small business owner. They own a shop or a restaurant or a professional service or whatever. There's no better economic development incentive than actually doing business with somebody that you know. Local support is a powerful incentive to keep the companies that have created jobs in your community. It's the economic developer's mission to create the environment so that individuals can create businesses, so that individuals can grow jobs. And then the economic developer must support those jobs and those businesses as they're grown in the community. Keep in mind, every business that's created in your community, every job that's created by that business in your community is another business that you don't have to go out and recruit later on. Every community has issues. The hardest part about an issue is dealing with it, admitting that you have it, and then having the courage to go out and deal with it directly. Keep in mind, dealing with it directly doesn't really cure things. It doesn't even make short-term things go away. But dealing with it directly keeps that issue from festering in your economy. Because festering issues in your economy can absolutely ruin opportunities right before your eyes. And it can actually eliminate opportunities you never even knew existed. You can go into any community in America, and you can see the signs that people don't really care. You see litter, you see unkempt property, you see bad roads, you see crime, you see poor education. You see these signs everywhere. You know it when you see it. And the question is, if a community doesn't care about itself, then why should it care about me? If a community doesn't care about itself, then your business can't be successful there. And then there's the bigger question. Why should I be there? The sad thing is, that's not just a question that's asked by people who are looking to come to your community. That's a question that's asked by people who are in your community who actually care, but they've given up fighting. These 5 elements are very broad in nature. The how part of each one of these elements must be decided by the community itself. I can assure you that this version of economic development isn't glamorous. This version of economic development doesn't make headlines, although it should. But this version of economic development will make a difference. The time for making headlines and ignoring the economy is absolutely over. We can't afford to keep trying to solve new problems with old ideas. Our ability to bounce back from a difficulty is directly proportional to the strength that we had going into that difficulty. If Mississippi's economy is weak and headed in the wrong direction before the pandemic, then it's only going to be accelerated in that direction after the pandemic. Economic development must be innovative in order to deal with that problem. Being innovative in economic development is no different from being innovative in business. Businesses that were innovative during the pandemic proved that you can turn difficulty into opportunity. The pandemic proved that those that innovate will succeed. If we can admit that economic development is not doing what it's supposed to do, then we must be prepared to change what we're doing. My final thought on this is that in order for us to be resilient, in order for us to change our situation, we must be aware of that situation. We must be prepared to look for changes. And then we must be prepared to move on those changes without hesitation. Thank you.